everybody. Welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by Projections, an IRI company. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit Projections online at projectionsinc.com. I'm Beth Pilgreen, and I'll be your host for today's episode of Project HR. In business, we value leaders at every level, in every department. But what does it actually mean to be a leader? How do we become one? And is there really only one kind of leader we should all be striving to be? To answer all these questions and more, we are joined today by Darren Reinke. Darren is the founder and managing director of executive coaching and training company Group 60, and he is the author of The Savage Leader, 13 Principles to Become a Better Leader from the Inside Out. Darren, great to have you on Project HR.
Great to be here.
Okay, let's talk a little about your background and how those experiences inspired this book.
I grew up as a kid, very typical kid in Northern California. Probably one of the most interesting fun facts about my life is my parents are both veterinarians. And people wonder, well, how did that come to be? Well, they met in vet school at Washington State. So that was an easy way for two vets to come together.
Right.
So for me, my lens into the work world was all through the lens of health science and helping pets in the case of my parents. I wanted to become a human orthopedic surgeon, which people look at me weird when I say that because my sister is a human dermatologist because my mom is a veterinary dermatologist. My dad is a veterinary orthopedic surgeon.
How interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. And so for me growing up, that's all I really knew. And all I wanted to be was to go to medical school and go and help people through that lens. So through a variety of experiences and insights and whatnot, just going through my middle of college, I realized that wasn't the path for me. And so luckily I had a very good mentor at the time who encouraged me when I expressed some interest in this nebulous world of business, or I thought it was nebulous. He said, hey, take a look at consulting and investment banking companies. I said, oh, that's interesting. And he said, you'll be able to figure out sort of what you want, learn about different functions, companies, industries, et cetera. So I ended up taking a job at Accenture, what was Anderson Consulting at the time, out of their San Francisco office. And it was wonderful. I got a chance to work for 4 years there, work with a variety of clients, a lot of different types of companies and industries, and really gain a solid consulting toolkit. But something was missing for me. Something just, I didn't really recognize it at the time. I wasn't giving back. I wasn't helping people in a way that really meant a lot to me, but I still had to progress my career. And so I figured, okay, well, what do I need next? I thought, okay, I need to get my MBA. So I went and did a 2-year MBA program full time at UC Berkeley in the Haas School of Business, and came out thinking I wanted to work for consumer brands. I worked for Neutrogena during my summer internship and then ended up getting back into consulting. And it was over those next couple of years that I just noticed that so many projects, just whether it was my time at Accenture or just doing more independent consulting, that so many projects went into the ditch because of underdeveloped leaders and leadership teams, that I noticed there was this need for soft skills. And I found myself just had a natural proclivity to do that and had an aptitude. And fast forward the tape, I veered into executive coaching and training. And a friend of mine challenged me, and I thought it was just a question, but I think it was actually a challenge. She said about 5 years ago, Darren, sounds like you're going to write a book. And so that was really the jumping off point for writing the book. So it was a culmination of my executive coaching and training experience. I wanted to find a way to put all the things together, or at least some of the things together of what I was coaching on, speaking on, training people on, and put it into a nice, easy to consume package that was a book.
Wow. Okay, I have to ask. So when you noticed that many people were missing the softer skills, did you at that time think, yeah, I could probably teach this? Or was it just kind of a tension that you felt?
It was more just a recognition over time in just terms of seeing just not great leaders. And unfortunately, sometimes people got thrust into leadership roles and becoming people leaders because of their ability to do great as individual contributors. But in fact, we're promoting in the wrong characteristics. So I don't know if I thought, do I have that? It was more of when a mentor of mine, Annette Templeton, who used to run Gallup's Global Consulting Division, told me about a coach training program she was going through. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Like, I know coaching through a sports lens, given being a high school athlete and passionate about sports, didn't really know what that meant from a business perspective. So I found myself in mentorship, management, advisory types of roles, but it wasn't until I really came across this role of it becoming an executive coach that I realized, oh yeah, I can do this. This does actually tap into my experiences and some of my strengths.
Interesting. Okay. So I have to ask you, why do you think leadership can be so problematic for people?
It's problematic for a couple of reasons. I think part of it is people they assume they're handed it, right? So their
Yeah.
business card, their email signature, their new promotion that grants them authority and says you're a leader, you're a people leader. Yeah, your title says that. Your key performance indicators say that. Definitely, it's true, but you have to earn it. And that was actually something I learned early on from Annette, was she was someone I reported to, but I noticed when she came into the organization that I was working for, that she could have come in, she could have used her experience, her array of skills, and just led with command and control. Hey, do this. We're going to do this next because I know what to do. But she didn't. She did the opposite of that. She actually went and listened and did a listening to her. So I would
That's
say one of the
huge.
big reasons, yeah, absolutely, is people think that they're granted that authority and they're a people leader versus the reality is they have to actually go and earn it. And I would say the second thing, which is people need to be anchored in their values in terms of what matters most, because otherwise they can tend to whipsaw between a leadership technique or some book they read or TED talk that they read or they watched, and it's not anchored in something that's really true and something that's enduring and something that matters to them. So I'd say that's the second thing is people's leadership styles are not anchored in their values. So they tend to shift over time and they're not consistent.
Yeah. And certainly I see the type of leader that you're mentioning too, that is just they perform well and they do excellent at their jobs. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're a leader, though. You're just great at what you do. It takes these people skills that you're talking about, I think, and the respect and the softness to really be a leader and move people, towards change.
Absolutely. And when I worked for Accenture, there was four competency groups when I was there: strategy, technology, process, and change management. I was in process, which is more or less jack of all trades. People had pretty good skills across the board. If you asked me at that point in time which one was least like me, I would have easily said change management. And now I find myself sprinting towards the softest of soft skills because I find that that's where change happens. That's where leaders become great. So it's absolutely, I think that the soft skills are so important. Of course, we have to have hard skills about projecting vision and decision making and assessing risk, but those soft skills just so often get overlooked in search of the hard skills.
Yeah. Okay. So, as a coach, I think I know how you may answer this question, but just humor me. Can leadership be taught? I feel like a lot of people might see it as something you either have or you don't.
I'm very optimistic in terms of how I see the world and how I view people. And I do think that, well, Gallup says 10% of people have management capabilities. I think it tends to be higher than that.
Hmm.
I think we can all be leaders in some way. And I don't mean just to give a vague cop out answer, but I do believe that we all have the capability to lead in different ways and different strengths we can tap into. But yes, absolutely, people I believe are born with a certain aptitude and certain set of skills, but I absolutely believe that people can put a shine on those things and actually improve them over time and to learn things that they hadn't been able to do before, especially if you approach it the right way.
Right. Well, and just thinking about how you mentioned in the very beginning that your mentor basically kind of helped change the trajectory of your life. And if you didn't have that mentor, where would your life be right now? And you get to do that. And you can teach other people to do that.
Yeah, I mean, mentors are so powerful, whether it's a mentor or a coach or a manager. And I
Yeah.
reflect back not just to Clyde, who is the person I mentioned who worked for a senior executive of a very large bank, but my first little league coach just lit a fire under me and taught me about personal accountability and just living up to and doing your best every day. And I think without that, whether it's a mentor, a manager, a coach, it's hard. And yeah, they do. It is a huge it's a huge opportunity. It's also a huge responsibility, frankly, because
Yeah.
we do have the ability to really have a lasting impact on people's lives.
Darren, tell me about your research process for this book. I understand you interviewed a ton of people. What patterns did you see emerging?
When I started the book, it was really just a blank slate. And I remember just having this, blank Microsoft Word document, and I wanted to write about leadership. And so I started interviewing people across all walks of life because I believe that leadership tips and principles come from all types of leaders. I think what we tend to read and hear is people who are Fortune 500 executives, people who have really unique experiences, but there's so many different people that have leadership lessons. So I went about interviewing, of course, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, people who'd successfully exited to with their companies, Fortune 500 executives, but then into some different places. So I've had a chance to volunteer with the Navy SEAL community here in San Diego. So I
Wow.
worked with a lot of Navy SEALs and special operators, and I learned while I was coaching them, I learned so much about leadership from things they taught me about dealing with fear and uncertainty and decision making and things like that. I also interviewed professional athletes, so NBA players, professional Ironman triathletes, even therapists and people like that. So just a high school prep school basketball coach, the Duke men's golf coach, just a whole range of people that just have different ways of looking through the lens of leadership. So for me, it was just interviewing a whole range of folks. I really wanted just to get a sense for what were they thinking, what were they doing to become great leaders. So that was I wouldn't call it a methodology, if you will, but it was really trying to get a sense for all different viewpoints on leadership,
Yeah.
which was fascinating.
Yeah, you interviewed a ton of different people. I appreciate that. Everything I've read about seems to line up with this approach being more internal, more based in values and empathy. So, how does that square with the book's title? Because when I think savage, I don't necessarily think empathy. Where did the title come from?
So it's interesting as it just hit me in terms of having a title. And as a former recovering marketer, I always look for a title and a hook, something that's interesting.
Yeah.
But also, and I was actually advised against the title by a very successful author. He suggested actually going with something like the humble savage, because it sounded like it might turn people off because they think of raw, they think of aggressive, violent when they think about savage. But to
Hmm.
me, is I think and I believe very strongly that the ability and willingness to look inside of ourselves with intention, to be introspective, and to look into dark corners in things we may not want to confront, like our self-limiting beliefs and our doubts and our
Hmm.
fears, and more positive things like what are our values, what really matters to us, how do we become authentic. To me, that's savage. It takes someone who's savage to actually look and do the hard work, to actually look at things, becoming more self-aware, put in the work, have that greater sense of intention to achieve your own definition of greatness. So to me, that's actually savage. And I think is actually does set the right tone in terms of what a savage leader is.
Darren, slow clap. I love the reason why you chose that. It does take so much more courage to go into those dark places and really look into yourself. That's very hard work.
It is hard work. And frankly, that's why when we work with people, it's what I mentioned, which is you start with intention in terms of what does it mean to be great. So I challenge people around that all the time, which is what does greatness mean to you? And that obviously differs if you're a Fortune 500 executive, you're an entrepreneur, if you're an athlete or just even a teacher or just wanting to be a better parent. And just starting by defining what greatness is and setting some intention towards achieving that definition of greatness. But then it's about reflection and self awareness, because that's where so much of that hard work happens. But if you can have all the intention, all the reflection in the world, but if you don't put it into action, you'll have progressed. You won't progress at all. So then it's about how do I put all those things into action? How do I overcome some of those self-limiting beliefs? How do I throw myself off the cliff, as I like to say, in terms of saying yes to challenges to actually grow and to get better and to achieve your own definition of greatness?
All right, Darren, we're going to take a sponsorship break right now, but when we return, we'll explore what it means to be a savage leader. So stay with us.
Well, hold on, this isn't quite a sponsorship break. I've actually got a really exciting announcement instead. To celebrate the end of our second year of weekly Project HR episodes, we are doing another big book giveaway. If you remember, last year we gave away a book from every author who appeared on Project HR in 2020. Now we're doing the same for 2021. Just by helping us spread the word about Project HR and all the great things we talk about over here, you could win a copy of every book featured on the podcast this year. That's well over a dozen titles from the best of HR, including Jennifer Moss's Burnout Epidemic, Perry Tim's second edition of Transformational HR, Dr. Scott Beeson's Whole Person Workplace, and so many more. To get all the details and to enter, head over to projectionsinc.com/podcast.
We're back with Darren Reinke, the author of The Savage Leader, 13 Principles to Become a Better Leader from the Inside Out. Darren, I'm all about diving right into these 13 principles, but I think it's important that we first address the last part of your book's title, the part about working from the inside out. Can you elaborate more on that, please?
So many times, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is that
Mm-hmm.
people when they focus on becoming a better leader or a great leader, they tend to focus on the observable behaviors. So things on the outside, things like becoming a better decision maker, projecting vision, even executive presence and things like that. But I believe there's an equally, if not more important, internal journey that we go on to become great. It's about understanding, identifying, and anchoring to our values. It's becoming and understanding what authentic means to us and creating that authentic leadership brand. It's about how do you connect and engage in a meaningful way with our tribe. It's about creating a mindset of lifelong learning, how to persevere during tough times, how to instill greater levels of patience, how to overcome what I consider the triad. It's almost like a three for the price of one. Self-limiting beliefs that become doubts that become fear. So those are all internal in nature. And that's what I think is really important, if not as important, more important than the externally visible behaviors that most people generally focus on, most books and most courses focus on.
Right. Yeah. Especially with leadership in mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, all of that makes sense to me as to why those would be valuable. But can you tell us, why is this inner approach so important?
It's important because the outer piece is what people see and what gets rewarded. It all depends on the internal piece. You
Yeah.
know, if you're going to be a great decision maker, what do decisions come down to? Ultimately, it comes down to a set of values, right? It's like, what are my own personal values? What are the values of my team? What are the values of my organization? Do I choose to launch this new product or go into a new area, or to cut some of the cut our inputs or go to a lower cost supplier, which could lead to a lower quality product and decrease customer satisfaction? Is those are all rooted in those values internally. So the externally visible behaviors really are built upon the internal journey, the internal values and beliefs.
In the book, you talk about overcoming inner obstacles. What types of obstacles are we talking about?
The big one is self-limiting beliefs, and just those are
Mm,
the thoughts, those are the tapes that we play. As I learned a phrase I borrowed from a client, he talks about playing the old tapes, the old people's perceptions or misperceptions of you, your old thoughts or beliefs. And let me give you an example of one of those from my own life, and it was part of the thrust for writing this book, which was in high school, I didn't get into AP English. In college, to fulfill all the pre-med requirements, I had to take a year of college level English, and I struggled in some of the literature courses. And the way that I internalized that was, oh, I'm not a good writer. Which what really happened was, okay, Darren struggled to analyze literature pieces, which really says nothing about your ability to write, but that's not the way I internalized it. So for me, I had this nagging self-limiting belief about my ability to write. And once I was challenged by my friend Dana about writing this book, part of the reason for doing it was actually to prove to myself that I actually could write, that I could put some sentences together and some thoughts in the world that hopefully would resonate with folks. So it was a way of challenging that self-limiting belief. But that's an example. And for me, it stemmed from a data point, which wasn't a valid data point, but was basically grades and relative struggles in these literature courses. But other people, it could be comments. It could be comments from a parent. It could be,
yeah,
us, the Smiths. We don't have those kinds of opportunities. Or those aren't the kind of things that happen to us. Or I don't have enough experience. Or I didn't go to a good enough school, or didn't get my MBA, or on my PhD, or whatever it might be. These are beliefs that
sure.
it's generally on us. Either we've created this own narrative or we've internalized it in the wrong way. But
Yeah.
these are just things that get in our own way.
Yeah. And I certainly know what you mean. Why is authenticity so critical to becoming a good leader, Darren?
Because the authentic leaders are the ones that resonate with people. They're the ones that we follow. They're the ones that are not just that cardboard cutout version of themselves or the person that they think they should be. It's interesting, as I lead a number of CEO groups, and we spend so much time talking about Elon Musk and Steve Jobs. And it's like I almost want to just stop talking about people like that, because those are such rare folks. Elon, with his
Hmm.
ability to multitask or split task, whether he can or can't, I don't know, but he's obviously a unique bird. So is Steve Jobs and a few other people. But I think it's important that we're truly authentic to who we are, to what values matter to us, and how we want to
Hmm.
show up in the world. Because, and that may sound like a bunch of, soft talk, soft skills, but it drives hard results because people line up behind those people, the people that have some sense of vulnerability, who share elements and stories about themselves and show up in a really authentic way with their teams.
Yeah. Well, I think vulnerability in just being a human being is contagious. You can let your guard down with somebody who lets their guard down, you know?
Absolutely. And so much of our job as a leader is to model that first.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people ask about authenticity. Well, is there a different version of myself I should show up at work versus at home or in different scenarios? And I said, well, it's almost like peeling back the layers of an onion. There should be some consistent values at our core. Of course, we're not going to show up the same way in an office meeting as we are at a 4th of July party with our dearest and closest friends. But
Sure.
those two, I wouldn't call them versions of yourself, but the way you express it should absolutely be aligned, because I think that's really important.
I do too. Okay, so let's get into these 13 principles. First, is this an ordered list? Are these topics we must address in sequential order?
The only one that's foundational and that really I believe people need to start with first is values, because those are what anchor and they guide us. In the other 12 principles are built upon that first principle. And I would say the second one is almost part of that too, which is about authenticity in terms of how do we use those values and show up in an authentic way. So those are two that are foundational to the balance of those principles. But I do believe in, when I was writing this, is I thought about those old books from the 80s. This is going to date me a little bit, but in terms of choose your own adventure. And I think about someone who can navigate the book based on what's landing with them well, like what they need in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe someone's not experiencing fear or doubt or self-limiting beliefs because they're not trying something new that's scaring them, but they could be needing to really dial up their ability to have greater levels of patience, both with themselves and their progress as well as with their team. So there could be things that you pick and choose depending on the time in your career and your life. And I believe it's almost like a cycle. It's you're going to go back to these things. So maybe you've overcome fear. It doesn't pertain now, but then you start something else. You take on a new role, you get a promotion, you start your own company, or you even leave your own company to go back for working for somebody else, or just some change in your life where fear might strike again. Those self-limiting beliefs might strike again. The doubt that you have, that self-doubt, some of those tapes that you play in your head may come up. So it's intended to really be to pick and choose depending on what's relevant to you at that time in your life and career. But the values, the authenticity, those are really two core principles that are relevant to everybody.
And do you follow all of these principles all of the time, or is it the kind of thing that you call upon as needed, like what you're just referencing with fear?
All of these principles I've tried and tested and applied in my own life. Am I applying all of them right now? Not as intentionally, but yes, I do think about the breadth of these principles. But frankly, it's too much to take on all 13 at one time. But yes, I've gone through, I've applied these. Some are more relevant depending on what I'm focusing on now and some of my goals. But they are for different times in your life, depending on what the issue is.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that the level of difficulty for each of these principles would vary from person to person, depending on the challenge that they're going through at the time.
Absolutely. Like for me, one of my biggest or my Achilles heel is a lack of patience. I always used to say, patience is for other people. Patience is a virtue for other people, which is so arrogant, so naive at the same time. And I've learned that what I really meant was having an impatience for action, fine. Having an impatience for outcomes, that can be tricky because there's a lot of things that are at play, a lot of things you can't always control. So trying to have an impatience for action, but having patience for outcomes, because you don't always get those right away, especially if it comes to some of these soft skills.
Right. And we're so used to in our culture too, just getting immediate gratification all the time. That is, I struggle with that too.
Absolutely.
Darren, we're going to take some time for another quick break, and we'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Beth Pilgreen, and our guest today is Darren Reinke, the author of The Savage Leader, 13 Principles to Become a Better Leader from the Inside Out. We are back. Are people more receptive to new leadership approaches today in the wake of the pandemic?
I think in some way, yes. In some way, no. I think people tend to double down when they have a lot of external stress on the outside and just keep doing the things that have gotten them results to date, or at least they think they've gotten them results to date. On the other hand, it's the great upheaval or the great renewal. I forget the term that was coined in terms of just the great reshuffle it was in terms of people's jobs and what they're doing these days. And I think it's an opportunity for us to really look inside of ourselves and see what we've done to date to be successful, or maybe some things we haven't done so well in the past, and think about what are some of the shifts that we want to take on at that point. So in some ways, yes, but some ways, no, because people in stressful times tend to double down and really narrow on what they've done in the past.
This book comes with a whole host of useful tools that you can use to uncover the savage leader within. Can you tell us a little bit more about these tools?
For me, One of my personal pet peeves is that I read a book, I listen to a TED talk, I hear a great speaker, I go to a seminar, and I don't have anything with much heft to really go and do afterwards. I'm all excited, the engine's spinning, so to speak, but I need to put it into gear. And so for me, when I wrote this book or conceptualized the book, I want to make sure that people could actually have really tangible actions. So each story, whether it's from a Navy SEAL or a therapist or a Fortune 500 executive, there's a key takeaway. So it's okay, how does this actually land well with me or for me? But also each chapter ends in a challenge, something that people can actually go and do to actually put that principle into action. But I wanted to go a step deeper. So I created a few free tools, one of which is the Savage Leader Field Guide. It basically takes each of these challenges, it creates a series of worksheets, some steps you can go do to take each of these 13 principles and put them into action to benefit your life and your career. So that's one tool we created. There's also the action planner, which basically allows you to take any of the goals that you're working on achieving and figuring out which of the principles can actually help you achieve those goals. So the principles are really an accelerator, an accelerant to help you achieve your goals. And then the third thing, which is a quick guide, which is basically a simple poster you can put up by your desk. That's just a reminder of all the 13 principles. It's just to help you keep those top of mind. So those are three tools, and we're constantly building new things to help people, because my goal, and I'm really committed to it, is helping people achieve their own definition of greatness and to become that savage leader in their own life.
I love that. I'm a lot like you too, to where after I go to a conference or read a book, if I don't have action items, I feel like I'm going to keep on with my life and just forget about what I just learned. So that's awesome that you offer that. I want to hear more about the Savage Leader community.
So Savage Leader community, and we're working on building that right now. And so we've created a private Facebook group. We've also have some tools that are private to people who are part of this community. So we're working on building that out. That's a work in progress right now, but more to come in the coming months. But the idea is I've never wanted to be the person preaching from the mountaintop. For me, my own brand and the way I coach people and train people is I'm in that foxhole with them. I'm sharing them stories, some of my own vulnerabilities, some of the challenges that I'm going to go face. And so with that, I know I don't have all the answers for everybody. I have these principles that I've learned from my own life and things that I've tried and tested and utilized, but also just the amazing people I've met in my life, but also people that have really embraced the concept of the savage leaders. There's so much that they can learn from each other. And that's what the goal of the Savage Leader community is.
And you have a podcast too, right?
I do. The podcast was launched a month after the book. So the book went live in January 2021, and the podcast launched a month later, the same title, The Savage Leader. And it was really a way to continue and deepen the conversation around the 13 principles and to learn new perspectives from different people. So like the book, it's different people, from the founder and CEO of Blenders Eyewear, a very successful sunglass company based here in San Diego, the military special forces, venture capitalists, professional Hollywood actors, the CEO of Pray.com, just a whole range of people, the head of the Golden State Warriors dance team, who talks about performance and how you deliver when it counts and you have no safety net. So all these, a huge variety of people that I think we can learn from. And so the whole goal of the podcast is to have just some great conversations and hopefully distill some leadership tips that people can apply in their life and their career.
Okay, subscribing now. That sounds super interesting. Thank you for that. We mentioned at the top of the show, but I wanted to make sure we circled back around to talk about your company, Group 60. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do there?
Group 60 focuses much like the book in terms of we help leaders and leadership teams develop from the inside out. So it starts with what we talked about in terms of understanding and anchoring to those values, understanding what it means to be authentic and creating that authentic brand for individual leaders, but also for teams in terms of a team charter, some of their values and some of their goals and so forth. So it really is about taking that inside out perspective in terms of developing individual leaders and leadership teams.
And where can our listeners go to learn more about you, the Savage Leader Universe, or Group 60?
The best place to go is thesavageleader.com. So that'll give you access to the podcast, all the different articles and blogs we've put out there, more tools. There's a free tools there that parallel the book, which I mentioned before. In terms of Group 60, you can go to group60.com. So that's group, GROUP, and then SIXTY.com.
And links to the Savage Leader website as well as to Group 60 will be included in this episode's companion guide. So be sure to unlock it today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Darren, it's time for our lightning round questions. And these are questions we ask every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about channeling your inner savage leader. In your opinion, which of these Marvel Avengers demonstrates more savage leadership? Iron Man or Captain America?
Captain America.
Hands down, he said. What's the best book you've read recently?
I love Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights.
I got that on Audible recently. I haven't started it yet, but you loved it?
So great. He is a savage leader. He's so introspective, and when you get to it, just the whole journey and how he stopped doing all these romantic comedies to really do work that mattered. It's so resonated with me, and just the deep level of reflection that he had throughout the book and in his life was just really inspiring. I learned so much from it.
Good, I'm excited. What's your favorite thing about the work you do?
I love, and it gives me goosebumps, is when I see shifts in people and I see growth. That just really, it's why I get up every single morning, is to do that kind of work and just to help people grow and change and get better.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
It's a little bit of start with why, which is Simon Sinek talks about. It was really my mentor, Annette, when she said, Darren, what's the philosophy of your firm? And that really kicked off an introspective journey that helped me go and think about my own why, my own purpose. And then ultimately what came out of that was the philosophy of the firm and what's actually layered throughout the book. So a really provocative question, and I guess I'd call it a piece of advice in the form of a question.
All right, I like that. Who or what inspires you?
My parents, in particular my dad, just for being a kid who grew up on a farm. His parents didn't even go to high school, didn't finish high school, and he was a self-made person. He went and put himself through veterinary school, and more importantly, he taught himself about business. He ended up starting his own company. He sold to a private equity firm and just learned about investing in the markets and in real estate. He's such a self-taught person, and so much introspection in terms of thinking about himself. He's really inspiring to me.
He sounds amazing. Thanks for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR, Darren.
Thanks for having me on.
And thanks too to our listeners. And once again, this is your reminder to grab the companion for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you'd like to be on Project HR or know someone who would, feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. And to make sure you never miss an episode of Project HR, we hope you'll subscribe to the podcast, drop us a line, leave us a review, or give us a handful of stars wherever you get your content. Finally, don't forget that Project HR's Big Book Giveaway is on, and Darren's book, The Savage Leader, is a part of it. Entries are being accepted through midnight tomorrow. That's midnight, October 29th. So go to www.projectionsinc.com and enter today. That's it for me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.